The HOA built a $3 million parking complex on what they thought was abandoned farmland, only to find out I owned every square inch. How far would you let them go before pulling the rug out from under them? Welcome to the story of how I turned their arrogance into my biggest payday. If you love stories where greedy HOAs get exactly what they deserve, hit that subscribe button because this one's going to blow your mind. I should have known something was wrong when I heard the sound of heavy machinery at dawn. The rumbling of diesel engines and the beep 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 of trucks backing up isn't exactly the soundtrack you expect when you live on 35 acres of Kansas farmland. But there I was, stumbling out of bed at 6 a.m. after just getting back from a 2-month visit to help my sister through her divorce, and the noise was coming from my own backyard. Actually, scratch that. It was coming from what used to be my wheat field. My name's Tom Bradley, and I've been farming this land since my dad passed it down to me 12 years ago. It's not fancy, just good, honest soil that grows decent wheat and corn, enough to keep the bills paid and put food on the table. The property's been in our family since 1961, and every inch of it means something to me. So you can imagine my shock when I looked out my kitchen window and saw a full construction crew setting up shop where my winter wheat should have been sprouting. I threw on jeans and boots and marched out there, my coffee mug still in hand. The crew had already laid out orange cones, temporary fencing, and one of those big white trailers that serves as a mobile office. A massive excavator was parked next to a pile of surveying equipment. A guy in a hard hat and reflective vest looked up as I approached. "Morning," he said with a friendly nod. "You live around here?" "I live right there," I said, pointing to my house about 200 yards away. "And you're digging up my wheat field?" His face went from friendly to confused in about half a second. "Sir, this is the Cedar Grove Parking Expansion Project. We've got permits for this whole area." "Permits for what?" He pulled a folded paper from his pocket and showed me a site map. According to the drawing, my entire south field, all 15 acres of it, was marked as Community Parking Development Zone Phase 1. "There's been a mistake," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. "This is private property." "My property?" The foreman, whose name tag read Rick, scratched his head. "That can't be right. The Cedar Grove HOA owns this whole section. We've been planning this project for 18 months. Cedar Grove HOA. I'd heard that name before. They were the homeowners association for the fancy neighborhood that had popped up about 2 miles east of my farm. Big houses, manicured lawns, and the kind of people who complained when my tractor was too loud at 7 a.m. "I need to talk to whoever's in charge," I said. Rick pointed toward the white trailer. "Mrs. Davidson is the project coordinator. She's in the office." I knocked on the trailer door and stepped inside. The woman behind the desk looked like she'd stepped out of a real estate magazine. Perfectly styled hair, designer glasses, and the kind of smile that politicians use when they're about to raise your taxes. "Can I help you?" she asked in a voice that was sweet enough to give you diabetes. "I'm Tom Bradley. I own the land you're about to dig up." Her smile didn't waver. "Oh my, I think there's been some confusion. This land was designated for community use after the county determined it was abandoned agricultural property." "Abandoned?" I almost laughed. "Lady, I harvested corn from this field 3 months ago." She opened a thick folder and pulled out several official-looking documents. "Mr. Bradley, is it? According to our records, this property has been in use for agricultural purposes for over 2 years. The county surveyor noted significant deterioration of farming infrastructure and absence of active cultivation." I stared at her. "I was growing wheat here until October. Before that, it was corn. I've got receipts from the grain elevator to prove it." "Well," she said, her tone becoming slightly less sweet, "sometimes these rural properties change hands or ownership becomes complicated. The Cedar Grove HOA filed all the proper paperwork with the county. Everything's been approved through the appropriate channels." She handed me a stack of papers, permits, zoning changes, environmental assessments, all with official county stamps. But as I flipped through them, one thing was glaringly obvious. "Where's my signature?" I asked. "Excuse me?" "My signature. You can't just take someone's land without them agreeing to it. Where did I sign off on any of this?" Mrs. Davidson's smile finally cracked a little. "In cases of abandoned or neglected property, the county has the authority to reassign land for community benefit. It's all perfectly legal under the Rural Development Recovery Act." I'd never heard of any Rural Development Recovery Act, but I wasn't about to admit that. Instead, I handed her papers back and said, "We'll see about that." As I walked back to my house, my mind was racing. How the hell could someone just decide my land was abandoned and take it? I'd been paying property taxes every year. The deed was in my name. This had to be some kind of mistake. That afternoon, I drove to the county courthouse. The clerk at the recorder's office, a woman named Helen who'd helped me with paperwork before, looked genuinely surprised when I explained what was happening. "That's odd," she said, pulling up my property records on her computer. "Your taxes are current, there are no liens against the property, and I don't see any abandonment proceedings. Then how did Cedar Grove get permission to build on it?" Helen frowned and typed some more. "Let me check something." After a few minutes, she printed out several pages and handed them to me. "Here's what I found. 6 months ago, someone filed a petition claiming your property showed signs of agricultural abandonment. They submitted photos and a report from a rural development specialist." I looked at the photos. They showed my south field during what looked like late fall or early winter, brown stubble, some scattered equipment, the normal aftermath of harvest. To someone who didn't know farming, it might look abandoned. To anyone with half a brain, it looked like a field in its natural post-harvest state. "Who filed the petition?" I asked. "Cedar Grove Homeowners Association, represented by..." Helen squinted at the screen. "Margaret Davidson. The same woman I just talked to. She hadn't just stumbled into my land by accident, she'd orchestrated this whole thing. Is there anything I can do to stop this?" "Well," Helen said carefully, "if you can prove you've been actively farming the land, you should be able to challenge the abandonment designation. But..." She paused. "But what?" "But they've already gotten county approval for the project. Stopping it now would require going to court, and that could take months. In the meantime, they have legal permission to proceed." I drove home feeling like I'd been sucker punched. But as I sat on my porch that evening watching the construction lights illuminate my field, something my grandfather used to say came back to me: sometimes the best way to catch a thief is to let them steal something first. What if I didn't try to stop them right away? What if I let them build their parking complex and then proved they'd built it on stolen land? I spent the next few days researching property law online. What I found made me smile for the first time since this whole mess started. In Kansas, if someone builds on your property without permission, those improvements become yours, even if they didn't know they were trespassing. It's called the doctrine of accession, and it's designed to prevent people from having to tear down buildings that were built by mistake. The theory is that the improvements add value to the land, so the landowner gets to keep them. But here's the beautiful part. It didn't matter if Cedar Grove thought they had permission. If that permission was based on fraud, and calling my actively farmed land abandoned was definitely fraud, then they were essentially building me a free parking complex. So I made a decision that probably seemed crazy to anyone watching. I was going to let them finish. The next morning, I walked over to the construction site with a box of donuts and a thermos of coffee. "Thought you guys might be hungry," I told the crew. Rick, the foreman, looked surprised but grateful. "Hey, thanks. That's really nice of you." "No problem. I know it's early and you've got a long day ahead." "You're not mad about us working so close to your house?" asked one of the younger workers. I shrugged. "What's done is done, right? Might as well make the best of it." Over the next few weeks, I became a regular fixture at the construction site. I brought coffee, sandwiches, and friendly conversation. The workers started calling me Tom the Donut Guy, and would wave when they saw me coming. And all the while, I was documenting everything. I took photos of the daily progress. I collected receipts that blew out of the site office dumpster. I recorded conversations with workers about materials and costs. Most importantly, I kept a detailed log of everything they were building on my land. Because what Cedar Grove was building wasn't just any parking complex. This was a premium facility with all the bells and whistles. 5 levels, Rick told me one day as we watched a crane lift steel beams into place. Each level holds 200 cars, so that's 1,000 parking spaces total. Plus ground-level retail space, electric vehicle charging stations, covered walkways, and a rooftop garden. "Sounds expensive," I said. "Oh yeah. I heard Mrs. Davidson telling someone it's running about $3.5 million total. $3.5 million. Being built on my land. Without my permission." I was starting to feel like the luckiest farmer in Kansas. Meanwhile, I was also building my legal case. I hired an attorney named Sarah Chin who specialized in property disputes. When I explained the situation and showed her my documentation, her eyes lit up like a kid on Christmas morning. "This is textbook fraud," she said. "They falsely claimed your land was abandoned to get development rights. Even if they genuinely believed it was abandoned, the fact that it wasn't makes their permits invalid." "So what happens to the parking complex?" Sarah grinned. "Well, they're building it on your property without valid permission. Under Kansas law, that makes it yours. The whole thing. Every concrete block, every steel beam, every electric car charger. They're essentially building you a multi-million-dollar gift. But Sarah advised patience. If we stop them now, they'll tear everything down and you'll just get your empty field back. If we let them finish and then prove ownership, you get to keep a completed parking facility worth millions. So I kept playing the part of the resigned farmer who'd accepted his fate. At the next Cedar Grove HOA meeting, I even stood up and said, if this project is good for the community, then I guess I can live with it. Margaret Davidson beamed like she'd just won the lottery. Thank you, Tom. It's wonderful to see neighbors coming together for the greater good. If only she knew what I was really thinking. Month by month, I watched my retirement fund grow. The parking complex was shaping up to be something truly impressive. 5 levels of pristine concrete, state-of-the-art LED lighting, covered walkways with architectural details that belonged in a downtown district, not rural Kansas. The ground floor retail space was being fitted out for a coffee shop and convenience store. The electric vehicle charging stations were top-of-the-line Tesla superchargers. The rooftop garden was going to have actual trees and park benches. This thing's going to be beautiful, Rick told me as we watched workers installing decorative stonework around the entrance. Mrs. Davidson spared no expense. How much has it cost so far? I asked. Last I heard we were pushing $4 million. But don't tell her I told you that. She's been trying to keep the costs quiet. $4 million. On my land. Without my permission. I was so excited I could barely sleep. But the best part was watching Margaret Davidson parade around the site like she was building the next great wonder of the world. Local newspapers did feature stories about innovative community development. The mayor came for photo ops. Davidson gave interviews about transforming and used rural land into community assets. Every quote, every photo, every news story went straight into my evidence file. By month 6, the parking complex was nearly complete. The structural work was done, the electrical systems were installed, the lighting was working, and they were putting the finishing touches on the landscaping. It was honestly beautiful. Definitely not something I could have afforded to build myself. Davidson had started talking about a grand opening ceremony. The local Chamber of Commerce wanted to give Cedar Grove an award for community development. There were rumors that state officials might attend. That's when I decided it was time to spring the trap. I called Sarah Chin and told her to file the lawsuit. I want to own my parking complex before they have their little ribbon-cutting ceremony. The legal documents were filed on a Tuesday morning. By Tuesday afternoon, construction had stopped and Margaret Davidson was standing in my driveway looking like someone had just told her the world was ending. Mr. Bradley, she said, her voice shaking slightly, I understand you've filed some kind of legal action regarding the parking facility. That's right, I said calmly. Turns out you built it on my land without permission. But the county approved. The county approved it based on your claim that my land was abandoned. But as you can see, I gestured toward my neatly maintained property, it's not abandoned at all. Never was. Davidson's face went through several shades of pale. Surely we can work something out. Perhaps some kind of compensation arrangement. Oh, we already have an arrangement, I said with a smile. You built me a parking complex. Thanks for that, by the way. It's really nice. You can't be serious. Dead serious. My lawyer says that since you built it on my property without valid permission, it belongs to me. All of it. Including that fancy coffee shop space. I pulled out a folder full of documents and handed her a copy of my lawsuit. This is my deed showing I own the land. This is proof that I've been actively farming it. This is documentation showing your abandonment claim was false. And this is a legal filing claiming ownership of all improvements made to my property. Davidson stared at the papers like they were written in a foreign language. We spent $4 million. $4.2 million according to my documentation. Thank you for that. I really couldn't have afforded such a nice facility on my own. This is theft. I almost laughed. Lady, you're the one who tried to steal my land. I'm just taking back what was always mine, plus the nice parking complex you built on it. Davidson stormed off, but not before threatening to fight this in court for as long as it takes. She was true to her word. Cedar Grove hired a team of lawyers and tried to argue that they'd acted in good faith based on county approval. They claimed that even if the land wasn't technically abandoned, they'd followed proper procedures and shouldn't be penalized for county mistakes. But Sarah Chin was ready for them. We had documentation proving I'd been actively farming the land. We had tax records showing I'd never missed a payment. We had grain elevator receipts proving recent harvests. And most damning of all, we had evidence that Davidson had submitted misleading photos to make productive farmland look abandoned. The case went to trial and it was like watching a slow-motion car crash. Cedar Grove's lawyers tried every argument they could think of, but the facts were undeniable. They built a multi-million-dollar parking complex on my land without valid permission. The judge's ruling was everything I could have hoped for. Not only did I get to keep the parking complex, but Cedar Grove was ordered to pay damages for the fraudulent land claim and trespassing. They also had to pay my legal fees. But the best part came during the damages phase. The judge ordered an appraisal of the completed parking facility to determine its value. The appraiser came back with a number that made me dizzy: $4.8 million. $4.8 million. That was what Cedar Grove had built on my 15 acres of farmland. Of course, Cedar Grove appealed. Davidson wasn't going to give up her crown jewel without a fight. But the appeals court upheld the original ruling, and their legal bills kept growing while mine stayed at zero. They were paying those too, remember? Finally, after 18 months of legal battles, Cedar Grove's insurance company stepped in and negotiated a settlement. They couldn't afford to keep fighting, and their lawyers had told them they had basically no chance of winning. But here's where the story gets really sweet. Instead of just taking ownership of the parking complex, I decided to be a businessman about it. I sold the facility to a commercial real estate company for $5.2 million. A nice profit over the appraised value since the local economy had improved during the legal fight. Then I bought my neighbor's adjoining 80 acres and built the farm operation I'd always dreamed of. With the leftover money, I also bought Margaret Davidson's house when she was forced to sell it to pay legal bills. I turned it into a very nice rental property. But the absolute best part of this whole story happened about 6 months after everything was settled. I was having coffee at the diner in town when I overheard two women talking at the next table. "Did you hear about that parking complex mess with Cedar Grove?" one of them said. "Oh my God, yes," replied the other. "Margaret Davidson thought she could just steal that farmer's land and got caught red-handed. I heard she had to move in with her sister in Topeka." "Serves her right," said the first woman. "You can't just take people's property because you think you're better than them." I couldn't help but smile as I paid my check. Sometimes justice tastes even better than coffee. These days, I farm about 115 acres of prime Kansas soil. My operation is bigger and more profitable than I ever imagined when I inherited that original 35 acres from my dad. I've got new equipment, updated irrigation systems, and a grain storage facility that's the envy of the county. And every morning when I drive past that parking complex, which is now called Bradley Commons, by the way, I tip my hat to it. Because it reminds me that sometimes the best way to beat bullies is to let them hang themselves with their own rope. The Cedar Grove HOA still exists, but it's a shadow of its former self. Half the board resigned in shame, and the other half got voted out by angry residents who were tired of being associated with the scandal. They stick to actual homeowner issues now: trash pickup schedules and lawn maintenance requirements. As for Margaret Davidson, I heard through the grapevine that she's working as a receptionist at a real estate office 2 counties over. No more fancy title, no more power trips, no more stealing other people's land. But you know what the funniest part is? About once a month, I get a call from someone wanting to buy my story rights for a movie or TV show. Apparently, the tale of the farmer who let the HOA build him a parking complex has become something of a legend. I always tell them the same thing: sorry, but this story isn't for sale. Some things are too good to share. Besides, I'm too busy farming to worry about Hollywood. And every time I harvest my wheat or corn, I think about how that arrogant HOA board thought they could just take what wasn't theirs. They built me a multi-million-dollar retirement plan and never saw it coming. If that's not justice, I don't know what is. So there you have it, the story of how I turned an HOA's greed into my biggest payday. If you enjoyed this tale of rural justice, hit that like button and subscribe for more stories where the little guy wins. And remember, sometimes the best revenge is just letting your enemies defeat themselves. Trust me, they're usually happy to do it.